What would you do if a ghost sent you a message? Not just any ghost, but an entire species you believed had vanished from the universe 300 years ago? That was the impossible reality facing Ambassador Reth. He was an old soul, one of the last of his people who could still remember Earth and its fierce, stubborn inhabitants. For centuries, humans had been nothing more than a footnote in a history book. But when an ancient, unfamiliar signal lit up his screen, a code unseen since the dawn of star travel, his old hands began to shake. "It can't be," he whispered. But it was. The humans were back. And if you believe that a promise should be kept, no matter how high the cost, you're going to want to hear the rest of this story. For Reth, it felt like it had happened only yesterday. 3 centuries prior, his people, the Kuri, had discovered Earth just as it was about to be snuffed out of existence. A planet-killer asteroid was hurtling toward the human homeworld, and their technology was far too primitive to have any hope of stopping it. In a last, desperate act, humanity broadcast a cry for help into the endless void of space, having no idea if anyone would even hear it. The Kuri heard. Their massive colony ship, the Endless Dawn, was the only vessel close enough to help. They diverted their course, and all 50,000 Kuri on board used the ship's powerful gravity engines to wrench the asteroid from its deadly path, a heroic act that tore their own vessel to pieces in the process. Every last one of them, 50,000 souls, had made the ultimate sacrifice to save a world they had never laid eyes on. The people of Earth were shattered by the act, overcome with a gratitude they couldn't express. They offered everything they had, but the Kuri asked for something different. They recognized humanity's incredible potential, but they also saw their talent for self-destruction. They were afraid of what might happen if such a young, aggressive species were to expand into the galaxy without maturing first. So, they proposed a deal. Humanity would confine itself to its own solar system for 300 years. No interstellar travel, no outside contact, just time to grow. The humans, heartbroken but bound by honor, accepted the agreement. The rest of the galaxy had a good chuckle about it. Everyone assumed the impulsive humans would break their promise in less than a generation, but they never did. For 300 silent years, humanity honored its word. The galaxy moved on, forgetting all about them, until Reth played that astonishing message for the Galactic Council. The entire chamber fell silent as they listened, but Director Fenn, a smug bureaucrat with 6 beady eyes, just waved a dismissive hand. "This is irrelevant," he scoffed. "The humans are likely extinct. This is just some old automated signal." Reth slowly shook his head. "You don't understand. I was there. I met them." "Promises don't hold up for 3 centuries, another council member sneered. "To a human," Reth replied, his voice unwavering, "a promise is everything." After hours of arguing, the council reluctantly approved sending a small probe, but Reth knew that wasn't good enough. He had to go himself. 3 days later, his ship emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the human system, and the sight that greeted him sent a chill down his spine. A single, dark vessel was waiting for him. It was a craft of sharp angles and smooth black metal, a design unlike anything he had ever seen, and it radiated a quiet, terrifying strength. It wasn't a huge ship, maybe with a crew of 100, but it looked incredibly lethal. A request to open communications flashed on his screen instantly. When Reth accepted, the face of a human woman appeared on the monitor. She had dark skin, closely cropped hair, and eyes that seemed to peer right into his soul. Her uniform was simple, adorned only with a patch showing Earth against a backdrop of stars. "Ambassador Reth," she stated, her voice perfectly calm. "My name is Anne Brooks. I speak for humanity." Reth was stunned. I can't believe you honored the agreement." A faint smile touched her lips. "We gave our word. 50,000 of your people gave their lives for every single man, woman, and child on our planet. We could never forget a debt of that magnitude," she continued. "Every child on Earth learns the names of the 50,000 we remember." A tight, painful knot formed in Reth's chest. "The galaxy is a different place now," he said, his voice heavy with grief. "My people, we are not the great civilization you once knew." "I know," Anne replied softly. "We've been watching. We saw what befell the Kuri. We know about the fading." Reth squeezed his eyes shut, the pain still raw. The fading was a genetic plague that was slowly erasing his entire species. Fewer children were born each year, and most of them didn't live to adulthood. The Kuri were facing complete extinction in less than 2 generations. "There's nothing to be done," Reth whispered. "We've made our peace with it." "No," Anne said, her voice suddenly turning to steel. "You saved us. Now it's our turn to save you. The debt is owed, Ambassador Reth. It is time. Tell us how humanity can serve the Kuri." Reth was dumbfounded. "You can't be serious. You owe us nothing. The 300 years of isolation was the repayment." Anne shook her head. "That isn't how we see it. 50,000 of your people died for us. We will not allow that sacrifice to have been in vain. We will not let your people fade into nothing while we still draw breath. This is who we are." "The Council will never allow it," Reth warned her. "They're afraid of you." "They are right to be," Anne answered simply. "We are dangerous, but never to our friends." "Never to our friends," she repeated. "Will you guide us to your homeworld, Ambassador? Will you let us try to help?" Reth thought of his own children, both lost to the fading before they had even reached 20 years of age. He thought of the grandchildren he would never hold. He thought of his entire civilization, once the saviors of a world, now quietly dying. "Yes," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I will take you home." Anne gave a single sharp nod. "Then let us begin. Inform your matriarch that humanity is coming to pay its debt." The screen went black, but Reth remained seated, gazing at the stars, feeling a tiny spark of impossible hope ignite in his heart. He had no clue if the humans could actually do anything to help, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. The galaxy had completely forgotten what humanity was capable of. They'd forgotten what happens when humans decide that someone or something is worth fighting for. And Reth had a sneaking suspicion that a lot of very powerful people were about to get a very rude awakening. Just as he anticipated, the news of humanity's return sent the Galactic Council into an absolute panic. Emergency sessions were held around the clock, and old dusty security files were cracked open, revealing precisely why the older species were suddenly so terrified. Director Fenn stood before the council, all 6 of his eyes blinking nervously as he displayed the old intelligence. "I have reviewed the historical archive," he announced, his voice shaking, "and what I have found is profoundly disturbing." An image of Earth popped up, plastered with bright red warning icons. "Humanity evolved on a Class 12 death world," Fenn explained. "To give you some context, most of our species originated on Class 3 or 4 worlds. Anything rated above a Class 8 is considered fundamentally uninhabitable." A wave of stunned murmurs rippled through the chamber. A Class 12 world was the stuff of nightmares. "The gravity is crushing," Fenn continued, reading from the file. "The atmosphere is a tussock soup. The weather patterns are a non-stop apocalypse. The native predators are monstrous, and new diseases can appear in a matter of hours. And to make matters worse, the humans spent thousands of years fighting one another with some of the most horrific weapons we have ever documented." A council member interjected, "But surely they have evolved beyond that?" Reth let out a short, bitter laugh from his chair. "You don't get it. Humans didn't just survive on their world. They thrived because of it. Every disaster made them stronger. Every war made them cleverer. Every single loss made them more determined." Fenn nodded grimly. "The archives support this. The moment they achieved spaceflight, they were solving problems our most brilliant scientists couldn't even begin to grasp. When a plague devastated the border colonies," he went on, "a team of human medical students synthesized a cure in just 3 weeks. Our leading research institutions had been working on it for decades with zero progress." "What exactly is the point you're trying to make?" another council member demanded. "My point is that we cannot let them get involved in galactic politics," Fenn yelled. "They are too unpredictable, too willing to shatter every rule. During one conflict, a single human warship annihilated an entire battle fleet by executing a maneuver our top strategists had dismissed as mathematically impossible. They rammed the enemy command ship at faster-than-light speeds," Reth added quietly. "The crew knew it was a one-way trip. They did it anyway to save millions of innocent lives. That is what humans do." The chamber was utterly silent. Finally, someone voiced the question on everyone's mind. "What do they want from us now?" "They want to help the Kuri," Reth answered. "They know about the fading." That statement caused an immediate uproar. Fenn slammed his gavel to restore order. "The Kuri's plight is a tragedy, but it is a hopeless one," he declared. "Hundreds of our finest scientific minds have studied the fading. The genetic damage is irreversible. There is no cure." "You can tell humanity that," Reth said, a small smile playing on his lips. "They have a hard time believing in the word impossible." "Then they are fools," Fenn snapped. "Perhaps," Reth conceded, "but they are fools who keep their promises. And 300 years ago, 50,000 of my people died for them. And right then, just as the argument hit its peak, humanity decided it was time to crash the party. A new voice, sharp and impossibly clear, cut right through the council's private debate. That shouldn't have been possible. This was a closed, encrypted channel. Suddenly, every single screen in the chamber flared to life, showing the face of a human woman, Anne Brooks. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, though her tone made it clear she wasn't sorry at all. "We figured you should know what we're about to do." Fenn, the council director, looked like he was about to pop. This is a secure session. Anne just smirked. Your security is a joke. I think it took my tech guy, 7 minutes to crack? But that's not the point. The point is, we're going to the Kuri homeworld. We're going to figure out this fading thing, and we are going to stop it. That's impossible, Fen shouted. Anne didn't even blink. We put 12 men on our moon using computers with less power than the device in your pocket. Imagine being told you can't save the very people who once rescued your entire species from extinction. That's the ridiculous position Ambassador Ann Brooks was in, staring down a council of aliens who cared more about their rules than they did about an entire world dying. If you think you know where this story is going, I promise you, you don't. So stick with me for a minute. We split the atom before we even had proper lab coats. Anna's voice sliced through the chamber's chaos. We sent little robotic explorers to other planets when our own spacesuits were barely holding themselves together. Humans have a long history of doing the impossible. This is just the next thing on our list. She locked eyes with them through the screen. So let me be crystal clear. We are not asking for your permission. We are telling you, as a courtesy, what is about to happen. The Kuri saved our world. Now we're going to save theirs. This is not up for debate. A pompous security chief leaned into his microphone, sneering. You have a single ship. We have thousands. You are in no position to defy us. Anne's lips curved into a small, cold smile that seemed to make the room feel colder. We brought one diplomatic ship. She let that sink in for a moment. Would you like to see what's waiting just beyond your sensor range? The main screen behind the council flickered, switching from her face to the inky blackness of space just outside their territory. And then they appeared. Silent, dark, and absolutely massive. It wasn't just a few ships. It was a fleet of dozens, maybe hundreds, hanging in the void like ghosts. Their sheer size was enough to send a wave of ice through every person in that chamber. 300 years is a very long time, Anne said, her voice dropping to a calm whisper. We didn't just sit on our hands. We built, we learned, we prepared. History taught us to hope for the best, but always be ready for the worst. We hoped we'd never have to use this fleet, but we were ready. This is a threat, the council director screamed, his face turning purple. No, Anne corrected him, her voice as solid as granite. This is a promise. We are going to save the Kuri. Anyone who gets in our way is going to have a profoundly bad day. But let me also be clear. We don't want your planets. We don't want your power. We are here to pay a debt. You can either help us or you can get out of our way. The choice is yours. And with that, her face vanished from the screens, plunging the chamber into utter chaos. Some shouted for war, others pleaded for reason. But then Reth, a wise old council member, slowly pushed himself up. His ancient bones creaked, but his voice cut through the noise. You are all terrified, he observed, his gaze sweeping across the room. Good. You should be. Because I have met humans. I know what they are capable of when they decide to protect something. What are you getting at, Reth? Fen demanded, his voice shaking. I'm saying, Reth went on, that 300 years ago we saved them from extinction, and in doing so they now consider us theirs, and humans protect what is theirs with a ferocity you cannot possibly imagine. They do not quit. The concept of defeat is not in their vocabulary. They would literally tear a star apart with their bare hands if it meant completing their mission. "That's completely insane," someone whispered from the back. "Yes," Reth agreed with a slow nod. "And that is exactly what makes them so terrifying. And such unbelievably loyal friends. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to contact my matriarch. The humans are coming to visit, and I think she'd want a heads up." He turned and shuffled out, leaving the council to their pointless squabbling. Reth knew it was already over. Humanity had made up its mind, and when humans make a decision, the universe itself has a funny way of getting in line. He just hoped his people could be saved before humanity had to give the galaxy a violent lesson on what they were capable of. The Kuri homeworld was once the shining jewel of this sector, a planet of glowing cities and billions of happy souls. Now it was a ghost world. Anne watched from the ship's viewport as they descended. From orbit, the planet was still a gorgeous marble of deep blue oceans and vibrant green continents, but it felt empty. The city lights twinkling below were faint, like the last embers of a dying fire. There were hardly any ships in orbit. It was a civilization slowly fading to black. "What's the latest population count?" she asked quietly. Dr. Henry Okoye, a kind-faced man from Lagos whose eyes held a deep sadness, looked at his data pad. 193 million Kuri left, he said, his voice heavy. Down from a peak of 14 billion. Anne squeezed her eyes shut for a second. 14 billion lives, ground down to less than 200 million. An entire species dying in slow motion. "How much time do they have left?" she asked. "At this rate, maybe 40 years before the last one is gone." Henry replied, "But the decline will speed up near the end. It always does." Commander Patricia Walsh stood nearby, her arms crossed tight. She was a tough, no-nonsense woman who looked like she was used to winning fights that everyone else called impossible. "The council is still blowing up our comms channel," she reported. "They're demanding we turn back." "Let them scream," Anne said, her eyes still fixed on the world below. "We didn't come all this way to get spooked by a bunch of bureaucrats." Their ship cut through the atmosphere without a single vibration. Human technology had taken a quantum leap during their 3 centuries of isolation. Everything they made now was quieter, tougher, and just plain better. The galaxy was about to learn that lesson the hard way. They sat down on a landing pad near the capital city. All around them, elegant towers soared towards the sky, but Anne could feel the crushing emptiness of the place. So many towers with dark, lifeless windows, streets without a single vehicle, beautiful parks now overgrown and wild because no one was left to care for them. A small welcoming party of 5 Kuri was waiting for them. They each had 4 arms and skin that shimmered with colors that showed their emotions. Right now, they were all dull shades of gray and blue, the colors of sorrow and resignation. The one in the center stood with a tired dignity, her eyes holding a sadness so deep it made Anne's own heart ache. "I am Matriarch Sela," she said, her English perfect. "Welcome to our home, Ambassador Brooks. Though I have to admit I don't understand why you are here." Anne walked forward and did something that made her own security team flinch. She dropped to one knee and bowed her head all the way to the ground. 50,000 of your people died to save my species," Anne said, her voice ringing with conviction. We remember every single one of their names. We teach their story to our children. We carved their names into a monument that covers 3 square kilometers of our home world. We have not forgotten Matriarch Sela. We will never forget. The matriarch's colors shifted, a faint shimmer of gold mixing with the gray. It might have been surprise, or maybe, just maybe, it was a tiny flicker of hope. "Please stand," Sila said softly. "You owe us nothing. The debt was paid when you accepted 300 years of isolation." Anne rose to her feet and looked the matriarch straight in her large, weary eyes. "With all due respect, matriarch, that's not how we humans see it. Your people saved us. Now, it's our turn to save you. It's as simple as that." "The fading has no cure," Scylla replied, her voice filled with grief. "We have tried everything imaginable. Our greatest scientists, the Council's best medical minds, researchers from a dozen different worlds. They all failed. We have come to accept our fate." "Well, we haven't," Anne shot back. "Dr. Okoye here is the most brilliant geneticist humanity has ever known. His team cured the Cairo plague in 4 months. They literally rebuilt the European genome after the Great Collapse. If anyone in this universe can help you, it's him." Henry stepped forward and gave a respectful nod. "Matriarch Sila, I'm going to need full access to your medical records, your genetic databases, and every single patient you have. I need to see everything." "You shall have it," Sila promised. "But I have to warn you not to get your hopes up. This sickness has broken many brilliant minds who came before you." "Then it's a good thing we humans are so stubborn," Henry said with a slight smile. "We don't break that easily." The matriarch then gave them a tour of the city. Anne had to force herself not to gawk at the empty apartment buildings, the silent monorail tracks, and the playgrounds where the ghosts of children's laughter still seemed to hang in the air. This was what extinction looked like up close. They finally arrived at the main hospital, a huge complex designed to care for thousands, but now only served less than 100 patients. The Curie were conserving every resource they had left. Henry and his team vanished into the labs, and within minutes they were already barking out requests for data, samples, and genetic codes. As Anne strolled with the matriarch through the withered remains of a once vibrant garden, the silence stretched on until the old leader, Sila, finally broke it. "Why do you care so much about this?" she asked, her voice raspy. "Your people are safe. Your world is flourishing. We're nothing to you." Anne offered a small, sad smile. "My grandmother used to tell me a story," she began softly, "about the day the asteroid was coming, the day your people died to save ours. Every single person on Earth was watching the sky. We all saw your ship fly into that rock. My grandmother said the entire world cried that day. Total strangers were hugging in the streets. Old enemies laid down their arms. It all happened because 50,000 souls we'd never even met chose to give up their lives so we could have a tomorrow." She paused and turned to face the ancient matriarch. That single day changed humanity. It showed us the best version of ourselves. We spent the next 300 years trying to live up to that sacrifice. We stopped our wars. We healed our planet. We built an entire civilization on a single simple idea that all life is precious and every life is worth fighting for. You gave us that gift, matriarch. You and those 50,000 heroes. Sila's skin rippled in a cascade of colors, an emotional storm too alien for Anne to fully grasp. "We have nothing to give you in return," she finally choked out, her voice a bare whisper. "We're not asking for payment," Anne replied gently. "We just want you to live. That's all the reward we could ever need." For the next 3 days, Henry and his team worked around the clock, powered by black coffee and a stubborn refusal to fail, digging into the Curie genetic code with a relentless focus only humans seem to possess. For 4 brutal days, Anne watched her team hit one brick wall after another, racing against the clock to solve a puzzle that was wiping out an entire species. She saw some of the brightest minds in the galaxy argue, and she saw tempers snap under the pressure. Then Henry found her, a strange, haunted look in his eyes. "I figured it out," he said, his voice tight. "And you have to see this." They gathered in the sealed briefing room, just Anne, Henry, Patricia, and the Curie matriarch Sella. Henry threw his findings onto the main screen, a dizzying mess of DNA strands and genetic markers. "The fading," he stated, getting right to the point. "It's not a disease, it's a weapon. Somebody engineered this." The room fell so silent you could hear a pin drop. Sella's brilliant, lively colors vanished, leaving her a shocking, sickly white. "Explain," Anne ordered, her voice dangerously quiet. "The genetic breakdown is too perfect," Henry said. "It's following a deliberate pattern, a targeted and systematic attack. This was no freak of nature. Someone released a genetic plague on the Curie people roughly 287 years ago. It was engineered to hide inside their DNA and trigger a slow-motion cascading system failure that gets passed from one generation to the next. And here's the truly twisted part. It was designed to perfectly mimic a natural decline. Whoever did this wanted the Curie to just quietly fade away, believing it was just their own tragic fate." Patricia let loose a string of vicious curses in 3 different languages, a cold fire igniting in her eyes. "Can you find the monsters responsible?" she hissed. "I already have," Henry said. "The biological signature they left behind is incredibly specific. It's like a genetic fingerprint, and it matches the engineering style of only one civilization in the entire known galaxy." He switched the display. A new image filled the screen, a species Anne had never seen before. They were tall, elegant beings with skin like living crystal, covered in a delicate web of sensory filaments. "The Vosk Concord," Henry announced. "They're the ones. Matriarch Sella, they have been systematically assassinating your people for almost 3 centuries. And they were so good at it, they were sure no one would ever discover the truth until it was far too late." Sella collapsed into a nearby chair, all 4 of her arms shaking uncontrollably. "But why? What could we have possibly done to deserve such a thing?" she whispered, her voice fracturing. "That doesn't matter now," Anne said, her tone laced with a chilling promise that made even Patricia shiver. "What matters is that they hurt our friends. They tried to commit genocide, and they were arrogant enough to believe they could get away with it." She fixed her gaze on Henry. "Can you fix it?" "Yes," he replied instantly, with 0 doubt in his voice. "Now that I know what to look for, I can engineer a counter-agent. It'll take some time, but I can reverse the damage." "Good," Anne said, her voice flat. "Get started. Patricia, I need you to send a Priority 1 message to Fleet Command. They have new orders." A slow, dangerous smile crept across Patricia's face. "And what orders would those be, Ambassador?" Anne's eyes snapped back to the image of the Vosk, her expression as hard as granite, and her voice filled with that quiet, terrifying rage that only humans can muster when pushed past their limit. "We're going to pay the Vosk a little visit. We're going to have a talk. And then we're going to teach the galaxy a lesson it should have learned 300 years ago." "What lesson is that?" Sella asked, her voice barely audible. Anne looked directly at her, and in the human's eyes, the matriarch saw something both unbelievably frightening and deeply comforting. "You never, ever hurt our friends." The human fleet tore a hole in reality, dropping out of warp on the very edge of Vosk territory like ghosts coming to collect a debt. Across the galaxy, it felt like everyone stopped to watch. On the bridge of his flagship, the Endless Dawn, named after the Kuri vessel that had saved Earth, Admiral Derek Stone stood like a man carved from stone. He was in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and the kind of scars that told you he'd survived a world that actively tried to kill him. Around him, his crew operated with a silent, deadly precision. "Report," he commanded. 47 ships, all present and accounted for," his tactical officer replied. "All systems are green. We are holding position, exactly 1 light minute from the Vosk border." "Good," Derek said. "Open a channel. Broadcast this on every frequency. I want every last Vosk with a receiver to hear what I have to say." The communications officer gave a sharp nod. "Channel is wide open, Admiral." Derek took a steadying breath, and his voice boomed across the void. "This is Admiral Derek Stone of the Terran Defense Fleet addressing the Vosk Concord. 287 years ago, you committed an act of unspeakable evil. You unleashed a genetic weapon upon the Kuri people. You orchestrated the slow, silent murder of billions, and you hid your crime behind a curtain of lies. You were wrong." He let the words hang in the silence, letting the weight of them settle across an entire empire. On planets and ships across Vosk space, billions of crystalline beings listened, frozen in shock. He wanted to make sure they understood what was coming. The Kuri are our allies. They are our friends. They saved our entire civilization when we were facing total extinction, and you tried to erase them from existence. So this is what is going to happen. You will surrender every single individual involved in the design and deployment of that bioweapon. You will hand over every bit of research connected to this atrocity. You have 12 standard hours to comply. If you fail to do so, we will come and get them ourselves. And I give you my word, you will not like it. The transmission cut off. Derek turned to his crew. And now, we wait. On the Vosk homeworld, the Leadership Council scrambled into an emergency session. Panic was an emotion the hyperlogical Vosk rarely experienced, but it was suffocatingly thick in the chamber. Supreme Coordinator Vesh stood before the council, his crystalline form shimmering with anxiety. "What is the exact number of human ships we are facing?" 47, his top military advisor answered. "A symbolic force, according to our metrics. We could have 600 of our warships at the border in under an hour." "Then why," Vesh demanded, "is everyone behaving as if our civilization is about to end?" An old council member, one who had secretly studied the forbidden historical archives, spoke up. "Because they are human," he said softly. Because they evolved on a death world. Because every piece of data we have on them screams that this is a war we cannot possibly win. That is nothing but superstition, Vesh snapped. They are a single species with a tiny fleet. We outnumber them more than 13 to 1. The Trellin Armada thought the same thing during the border wars, the old counselor countered. They had superior numbers, too. The humans annihilated their entire fleet in 6 hours. That was a fluke, Vesh insisted. A 1 in a million victory. Then, permit me to share what our intelligence has gathered, the elder said, projecting data onto the main screen. Human warships are not designed for elegance. They are built with layer upon layer of redundant systems and compartmentalized sections. They are caked in armor so thick it would make our ships too slow to move. But humans don't care about speed. They care about being able to hit back no matter what you do to them. Images of human battleships covered in weapon emplacements flashed across the screen. Their weapon systems are savage and direct, he continued. They favor missiles, railgun slugs, and simple metal rods fired at relativistic speeds. They still use radiation weapons that we outlawed as barbaric centuries ago, Model So. They use tactics that no sane, civilized species would ever consider, the old council member warned, his voice grim. Vesh scoffed, his arrogance a shield against the unsettling news. Like what, old-timer? Ramming, the elder said flatly. They'll pilot $1 billion warship straight into one of ours just to win a fight. Their pilots can pull G-forces that would turn our bodies to dust. They wear suits that let them walk through fire that would boil us in our shells. But the most terrifying part, they never, ever give up. A cold silence fell over the chamber. One of them finally asked, "So what's the plan?" The military advisor shifted nervously. We could fight. We might even win. And at what cost? The elder shot back. We went after the Kuri because they were a dying species, an easy target. Humanity isn't weak. They're furious. And an angry human is the most dangerous predator in this galaxy. Vesh weighed his choices. His people had pulled off what they believed was the perfect crime. Erasing the Kuri was a cold, calculated move to take out a future competitor disguised as a natural disaster. No one was ever supposed to find out. But somehow, these apes from a backwater death world had pieced it all together. And now they were at his doorstep, demanding payment in blood. "Send our response," Vesh commanded. "Tell them we have no idea what they're talking about. Tell them their claims are baseless and offensive. Order them to leave our space immediately or face the consequences." The old council member let out a soft sigh of defeat as the message went out. The 12 hours ticked by. The human fleet didn't budge, a silent, deadly line painted across the star. The moment the deadline passed, they swarmed. The Vosk had assembled their entire navy, 600 warships, creating a brilliant, impenetrable shield around their home system. They were confident. They had superior numbers and the home field advantage. They were sure they could repel the human invaders. They couldn't have been more wrong. The human ships charged forward, moving with a speed the Voss computers insisted was impossible. There were no graceful arcs, no clever formations. They just came straight on, like a starved wolf pack that had finally been let off the leash. The Vosk opened fire first, their sophisticated energy weapons lashing out, weapons designed to disable, not destroy. It was meant to be a clean, civilized battle, minimizing losses, but the energy bolts just splashed against the human ship's armor like rain on a window. The human ships didn't even seem to notice, and then they fired back. In that moment, the Vosk learned what a real war felt like. Swarms of missiles bloomed in the darkness, hundreds at a time, completely overwhelming the Vosk defense grids. Simple slugs of metal, accelerated to near light speed, tore through the void, punching through shields and hulls like they were made of paper. Then came the radiation warheads, poisoning the space with lethal energy the Vosk had no defense against. In the first hour of battle, the Vosk lost 80 ships. The humans lost 2. "Fall back!" Vesh shrieked, his voice cracking with panic. "Retreat to the second line!" But the humans gave them no quarter. They pressed the attack without mercy, hunting down fleeing Vosk ships and taking them apart with a brutal, terrifying precision. Human pilots were pulling off moves that defied physics. Their ships ducked and weaved through the chaos, hitting every weak point in the Vosk lines. When one panicked Vosk captain tried to ram a human cruiser, the smaller ship simply blasted its side thrusters, dodged the clumsy attack, and blew out the Vosk ship's engines. It was left dead in the water as the humans raced onto their next target. 6 hours later, the mighty Vosk fleet was a smoldering wreck, its ships scattering in a desperate, panicked rout. Some even tried to surrender, but the humans either didn't receive the transmissions or simply didn't care. They just kept coming, kept firing, kept ending them. From his command deck, Captain Derrick watched the entire Vosk defense network get erased from the map. "Hold fire on any vessel broadcasting surrender codes," he ordered calmly, "but continue to neutralize all military infrastructure." "Sir, the Council is desperately hailing us, demanding negotiations," his comms officer reported. "Tell them they're a little late for that," Derrick replied, his voice as cold as deep space. "Now they can have a front row seat to what happens when you murder our friends." The human fleet advanced toward the Vosk homeworld, but they ignored the cities and civilian centers. Instead, with surgical accuracy, they vaporized every military base, every weapons factory, and every single shipyard. They used orbital strikes and precision missiles to grind the entire Vosk war machine into cosmic dust. The Vosk could only watch in sheer horror as 3 centuries of military dominance was wiped out in less than a day. At last, when every Vosk warship was either a floating piece of junk or completely powerless, and every military installation was a smoking crater, Derrick opened a channel. "The fighting is over," he announced galaxy-wide, "but the consequences are just beginning. You will surrender every individual involved in the genocide of the Kuri. You will give us all of your research, every document, and all related evidence. You have 6 hours. If you refuse, we will begin dismantling your civilian infrastructure, your power stations, your water purifiers, your comms relays. We won't kill your people, but we will send your society back to the Stone Age. The choice is yours." This time, the Vosk didn't waste a second. They knew they were utterly beaten. Coordinator Vesh himself led the delegation to the human flagship, carrying data chips with everything the humans demanded. His crystalline body was dull, clouded with a mix of humiliation and raw fear. Derrick met him in the hangar bay, flanked by Marines in hulking power armor. The humans were shorter than the Vosk, but they gave off an aura of raw power that made them seem like giants. "Why?" Vesh whispered, his voice barely a crackle. "Why do you care so much about the Kuri? They weren't your species." Dererick stared at him with pure, icy contempt. "Because they were our friends when we had none. Because they showed us there was a better way. Because when you care about someone, you protect them, a concept your people clearly don't understand." "We were protecting our future," Vesh protested feebly. "The Kuri were becoming a threat." "So you decided to murder their entire species," Dererick said, his voice dangerously level. "Where I come from, we have a name for that, genocide. And we have a zero-tolerance policy for it. No excuses, no exceptions." He took the data chips from Vesh's trembling hands. "You should thank whatever gods you have that we aren't you. We could have burned your world. We could have given you the exact same treatment you gave the Kuri. But we're better than that. We don't slaughter innocents." Dererick leaned closer, his voice dropping to a quiet conversational tone that was more terrifying than any scream. "But I want you to listen very carefully, Coordinator. If your people ever, and I mean ever so much as look at the Kuri the wrong way again, we will be back, and next time we won't be this nice." "Now get off my ship!" Vesh nearly tripped over his own feet in his haste to escape, and Dererick turned to his crew. "Get Ambassador Brooks on comms. We have what we came for. It's time to go home." In the following days, the Galactic Council held an emergency session, and for the first time in 300 years, its members learned the meaning of true fear. Director Fenn stood before the assembly, his 6 eyes darting nervously around the room. On the main view screen, footage of the battle at Vaz Prime played on a silent, horrifying loop. 600 warships turned into a graveyard in less than 24 hours, military fortresses reduced to craters, an entire civilization's power simply erased. "This is an outrage," yelled Representative Corvin of the Dreth Collective. "Humanity has attacked a council member. They must face sanctions. Their fleet must be dismantled. They must be what, exactly?" Reth, a respected elder, cut in sharply. "Fought, defeated. By all means, Representative Corvin, please explain how you plan to do what 600 Vosk warships could not." Corvin sputtered and fell silent. No one else had an answer either. A smaller, more timid representative from the Helix Federation spoke up. "They used radiation weapons. Such things are banned by the Civilized Warfare Accords." "Humanity never signed those accords," Reth pointed out. "They were completely isolated from the galaxy when we wrote those rules. You can't punish a people for breaking a treaty they never agreed to." "That's a technicality," Fenn snapped. "No," Reth said, his voice full of finality. "That is the reality. Humanity plays by its own rules, with its own moral code. And frankly, after seeing the evidence they provided about what the Vosk did, I'd say their actions were not just justified, they were necessary." The chamber exploded into chaos, with representatives shouting over one another. Fenn waved his arms, trying to regain control. "The Vosk situation was an internal matter," Fenn insisted. "The decline of the Kuri was tragic, yes, but it was not the place of outsiders to get involved. The Vosk systematically slaughtered billions of innocent beings," Reth countered, his voice ringing with authority. "They created a bioweapon to cover up their crime. You want to sweep that under the rug as an internal matter? You really think genocide is something we should just ignore?" "The humans had no right to interfere," another delegate screamed. But the humans were completely in the right, Reth shot back. They were defending their friends, or has that word totally lost its meaning in this chamber? Just then, a new voice cut through the bickering. The main view screen flickered, and suddenly, Anne Brooks was there, having once again waltzed through their top-secret network like it was an open door. "Morning, council members," she said with a bright, disarming smile. "I had a feeling you'd be wondering what humanity's next move is." "Get off our private channels," Fenn roared. "You know, your security is still just awful," Anne noted casually. "You should really look into better encryption, but I'm not here to talk about that. I'm here to let you know that Dr. Okoye has just perfected a cure for the fading. In 6 months, every last Curie will be healthy again. Their people will recover, and their population will start to grow. Your little plan to let them get wiped out has officially failed." For a second, you could have heard a pin drop. Then the room absolutely erupted with questions. Anne just waited, letting them tire themselves out. "The cure comes from human genetic engineering," she explained. "It's 100% safe, it works, and it's permanent. And we're giving it to the Curie for free, no strings attached." "Just like that?" a counselor asked, his voice dripping with suspicion. "You're just going to save their entire species and ask for nothing?" "We saved them because they saved us first," Anne said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "That's what friends do. At least, that's how we humans see it. Maybe you all handle things differently around here." Fenn leaned into his microphone. "And what about the Vosh? You brought their whole military to its knees. You humiliated them in front of the entire galaxy. What are we supposed to do about that?" Anne's warm smile vanished, replaced by something as hard as steel. "The Vosh are guilty of attempted genocide. They murdered billions. We gave you all the evidence you could possibly ask for. What you do with that information is your business. But I need every single one of you to understand something about humanity with zero confusion." She paused, letting the silence stretch, making sure every eye in the room was locked on her. "We are not your enemy. We don't want to conquer you or rule you. All we want is to live in a galaxy where friends actually have each other's backs, where the strong protect the weak, and where genocidal maniacs are held responsible for their actions. If you can give us a galaxy like that, we'll be the best partners you've ever had. But if you can't, well, we'll just keep doing what needs to be done all by ourselves." "That sounds an awful lot like a threat," a counselor named Corvin remarked. "It's a promise," Anne corrected him gently. "This galaxy has forgotten what it feels like to believe in something, to risk your own neck for someone else. You've forgotten what it means to keep your word, especially when it's hard. But humanity remembers. We learned it from the Curie 300 years ago, when they sacrificed 50,000 of their own people just to save us." She leaned closer to the camera. "You're all so wrapped up in your laws and your territories and your politics that you've forgotten about justice, about honor, about doing the right thing just because it's the right thing. The Vosh tried to erase an entire species because they were in their way, and you want to lecture us for stopping them?" A heavy silence settled over the chamber. The truth hit them like a punch to the gut, and no one could deny it. Anne stood her ground. "Humanity is back on the galactic stage. We'll be good neighbors, if you'll have us. But we will not be pushed around. We will not look the other way when we see evil, just because it's convenient. And we will always, always protect our friends. Don't you ever forget it." The screen went blank. The council chamber was quiet for a long, uncomfortable moment. Finally, Reth spoke up. "I move that we officially recognize humanity as an independent power, not as a member of this council, but as an equal. Let them forge their own path, let them follow their own code, and let's all hope we never give them a reason to see us as their enemy." "They're dangerous," Fen muttered. "Yes, they are," Reth agreed. "But they're also honorable, incredibly loyal, and they run toward a fight for justice when the rest of us run away. The galaxy could use more of that, not less." The motion was put to a vote. It was close, but it passed. Humanity was now officially recognized as an independent power, free to manage its own affairs and defend its allies as it saw fit. It wasn't exactly a friendship, not yet anyway, but it was a start. Meanwhile, on the planet Quan, matriarch Sella stood in a medical center, watching as Dr. Okoye gave the very first cures to her people. For the first time in a generation, there was real hope. The Curie patients, who everyone thought were on a slow one-way road to extinction, were getting better. The genetic plague was being defeated, and life was flowing back into a species that had been on the brink of vanishing forever. Sella found Ambassador Anne Brooks in the Starlight Garden, looking up at the vast starry night. She walked over to her quietly. "Our doctors, they think that in just one generation, our population will be back over 1 billion. Sella said, her voice choked with emotion. "They say my people are going to live, that we're going to thrive again and take back the future that was stolen from us." Anne simply nodded. "Good. That's all we ever wanted." But Sella had to ask, Why risk all of this for us? You could have stayed safe in your little corner of the galaxy. You could have just let us die, and nobody would have blamed you." Finally, Anne turned to face her, the light of distant stars reflecting in her eyes. "When I was a little girl," Anne began, "my grandmother took me to see the great memorial, the one with 50,000 names carved into it. She told me, 'Every single name on this wall is a hero who died so you could be born, so our people could have a future.'" Anne's voice shook just for a second. "I spent hours there that day, reading name after name, and I made them a promise. I promised we would never, ever forget what they did for us, that we would earn the gift they gave us, and that if the Curie ever needed help, we would come running." Sella looked at her, and a deep understanding washed over her face. "You kept your promise." Anne gave a small, firm smile. "Humans always keep our promises, or we die trying. It's just who we are." Sella's bioluminescent skin glowed with warm golds and soft blues, a living expression of pure gratitude. "You've given us our future. How can we possibly repay you?" Anne's smile widened a bit. "You already did, 300 years ago. As far as I'm concerned, we're even." But they both knew it was more than that. This wasn't about paying back a debt. Real friendship never is. It's about having each other's backs no matter what, and working to make the universe a little bit better. And all across the galaxy, other civilizations were watching. They whispered about humanity's return, which wasn't so much a quiet re-entry as it was a clap of thunder. In a matter of hours, they had taken apart a major military power. They had stood up to the Galactic Council, and they had saved a dying race, not for profit or power, but simply because it was the right thing to do. Some were scared to death of them. Others were deeply inspired, and a few, tucked away on forgotten worlds, began to wonder, if they were ever in trouble, would humanity come for them too? Back on Earth, people were celebrating. They had made good on a promise from 3 centuries ago. The debt was paid. But it was more than that. Humanity had just put the entire galaxy on notice. We're back. We're strong, and we have zero tolerance for bullies. The age of human isolation was over. The age of human influence was just beginning. 5 years flew by, and the galaxy slowly got used to having humans around. The change was slow, but you couldn't miss it. On the Curie homeworlds, cities that had been dark for decades now glowed with brilliant light. The sound of children laughing filled parks that had once been silent memorials. Their population soared past 1 billion and kept right on climbing. The human doctor's gene therapy had worked better than anyone had dared to hope. Matriarch Shella stood on a high balcony watching shuttles zip through sky lanes that were completely empty just a few years before. Next to her stood Anne Brooks, a little older but with that same unbreakable spirit all humans seem to have. "We're naming a city after your grandmother," Sella said, looking down at the vibrant metropolis below, "and a university after Dr. Okoye, and a whole star system after Admiral Stone. We want to make sure no one ever forgets." "We are incredibly honored," Anne said softly, "but you really don't owe us anything else." Sella finally turned to her. "This isn't about a debt. This is about friendship. It's about remembering that when our light was about to go out, humanity showed up. Down on the streets, Curie and humans were working together on new buildings and research projects. A powerful bond had been formed between their people. The Curie were amazed by the humans' relentless drive and creativity, and the humans were fascinated by the Curie's deep, artistic souls. "The Council keeps sending messengers," Anne mentioned offhandedly. "They're very interested in talking about official treaties now." Sella gave her a curious look. "And are you going to talk to them?" Anne cracked a sly smile. "Maybe, but if they do, it's on our terms. We have no intention of joining their council, but we're happy to talk trade, diplomacy, and defense with anyone who shares our values." "They're still spooked about what went down with the Vosh," Sella noted. Once the proof of their planned genocide hit the galactic newsnet, the Council brought the hammer down on the Vosh Concordat. Their military was gutted, their government was dismantled, and they were buried under reparations to the Curie. It wasn't perfect, but it was justice. "The Vosh had to learn," Anne said, her voice like steel. "You don't get to wipe out an entire species just because it's convenient. There are always consequences." The word is that some species think humanity is too aggressive, and other species think mercy is the same as weakness, Anne shot back. "We proved them all wrong. We had the power to erase the Vosh from the galaxy, but we didn't. We gave them a chance to be better. That's not aggression, that's justice with a spine." Just then a little Curie girl walked up to them, holding a data tablet. She looked shy, but her eyes were full of purpose. "Ambassador Brooks?" she asked, her English perfect. "For my history class, I'm studying the human ship, the Endless Dawn. Can you tell me why you gave your flagship the same name as our old colony ship?" In an instant, all the hard edges on Anne vanished. She knelt down to be on the girl's level, her expression completely transformed. "Because we wanted the whole galaxy to remember what your people did for us," she said gently. The first endless dawn was filled with 50,000 Curie who gave up everything to save Earth. Our ship carries that name to honor them and to remind ourselves why we're out here in the first place. The little girl's face absolutely beamed. My teacher says humans always pay their debts. Your teacher is a very smart person, Annan confirmed. We always do. But even more than that, we always remember our friends, and the Curie will always, always be our friends. The child smiled, thanked her, and then dashed off. Sella's skin shimmered with a warm, golden light. You're a natural with kids, she remarked. I've got 3 nieces back on Earth, Anne said, getting to her feet. I get about 1,000,000 questions a day. It's good practice. They stood in a comfortable silence for a while, just watching the city lights flicker and flow beneath them. Sella was the first to speak. You know, other worlds are reaching out, not the big players on the council, but the smaller independent systems. They're asking about you, Anne. They're wondering if humanity would come and save them too. We've been getting the messages, Anne confirmed with a nod. There's a mining colony being terrorized by pirates, a research station in the middle of a medical crisis, 2 systems on the brink of war. Suddenly everyone's looking for a human hero. And will you be? Sella asked, her tone soft. Anne let out a long breath. We'll help where we can, when we believe it's the right thing to do. But we're not trying to be the galaxy's police. It's not our job to fix everyone's problems. Our job, Anne went on, is to be good neighbors and to stand up for those who can't stand up for themselves. Sella let out a soft chuckle. The galaxy has no idea what to do with you. They're used to empires trying to conquer them, or powers that don't give a damn. You're something else entirely. We're friends, Anne replied, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. We help our friends, and we happen to be pretty good at making new ones. That's our way. Later that night, Anne sat down to draft her official report to Earth. Her room was filled with gifts from dozens of species that had made contact in the last few years. Stunning art, amazing technology. Each one was a new bridge, a new friendship. This is Ambassador Anne Brooks filing my 5-year report from Curie Space, she began. The Curie population has now hit 1 point at 3 billion and is rising fast. The genetic plague that almost destroyed them, completely eradicated. They aren't just surviving, they are thriving. She paused for a moment. Our standing with the Galactic Council is complicated. 1 minute they're afraid of us, the next they respect us, and the minute after that, they desperately need our help. We've opened official diplomatic channels with 17 independent species. Trade is booming, and maybe best of all, we've already prevented 3 wars before they could even start, just by getting everyone to the table to talk. A wave of pride washed over Anne as she leaned back in her chair. The galaxy is learning that you can't push humanity around, but it's also learning that we aren't the monsters they thought we were. We're looking for partners, not puppets. We offer a helping hand, not an iron fist, and we have absolutely zero tolerance for genocide, slavery, or any other crime against sentient life. A faint smile touched her lips. Some of the more paranoid species are calling us Death World Protectors. They mean it as an insult, but I have to admit I kind of like it. We grew up in a tough neighborhood, and we learned how to protect what's important. Now, we see the whole galaxy as our neighborhood, not to rule, but to watch over. Anne sent the report rocketing across the stars. She walked to her window, looking out at the endless ocean of light. Trillions of lives were unfolding out there at this very moment. Some in peace, others in chaos, and for the first time in 300 years, humanity was a part of it again, not as conquerors, and certainly not as servants, but as equals, as friends, as the people who you could always count on to keep their word. A soft chime interrupted her thoughts. It was Reth requesting entry. Anne smiled and opened the door. The old Curie had become a dear friend and a trusted advisor. He entered the room, his skin shifting to a calm, peaceful shade of blue. "Good evening, Anne. I hope I'm not intruding." "Never, Reth," she said with genuine warmth. "What's on your mind?" Reth folded himself into a chair built to accommodate his four-armed frame. "I came to thank you," Reth said, his voice quiet but echoing with the gratitude of his entire species. "And not just for saving my people. That is a debt we could never repay. I mean for reminding the galaxy of a truth it tried so hard to forget." "And what's that?" Anne asked, her gaze still fixed on the star-dusted night. "That honor still matters," he replied, "that your word is your bond, that doing the right thing, especially when it's the hardest thing, that is what truly defines who you are. The galaxy grew so cynical, Anne. It was all about profit and power. You reminded us that some things are worth fighting for, even if they don't benefit you directly." He sat across from her, the air thick with the weight of history. "We learned that from the 50,000 of your people who died to save us. They showed us what true sacrifice means, what a real hero is. We are just trying to be worthy of their memory." "Oh, you are," Anne insisted, her tone leaving no room for doubt. "More than you know. Have you heard what the young Curie are saying these days? When they face a challenge that seems impossible?" Anne shook her head, intrigued. They look at each other and ask, "What would a human do?" A true, heartfelt smile spread across Reth's face. "They mean it as the highest possible compliment. Humans don't give up. Humans find a way. Humans protect their friends, no matter the cost. You've become a symbol of hope for an entire generation." "That's a heavy burden to carry," Anne whispered, humbled. "It is," Reth agreed. "But if anyone can bear that weight, it is your people. You were born on a death world. You didn't just survive, you thrived while the universe tried to crush you. And now you're using that incredible strength to lift others up. There is no greater calling than that." They talked for hours, sharing ideas, dreaming up plans, and charting a course for a galaxy of new possibilities. The Curie were excited to propose a joint scientific mission with humanity. Several other species were already asking about forming mutual defense pacts. And whispers were traveling the star lanes about a species on the outer rim, facing annihilation from a cosmic disaster, who were wondering if, just maybe, these humans were their only hope. When Reth finally took his leave, Anne found herself back at the window, staring out at the vastness. 5 years ago, she came to this system expecting to document the final days of a dying race, to offer what little comfort she could as their light faded. Instead, she got to witness their salvation. Instead, humanity had announced its return to the galactic stage with a declaration that no one could ignore. The debt was paid. The Curie had a future. And humanity had proven that the stubborn little creatures from that deadly world were more than just a force to be feared. But they also had a backbone of steel, a sense of honor that ran deep, and they absolutely refused to walk away from a righteous fight. Some species found that terrifying. Others saw it as something to admire, but every single one of them was finally starting to get it. Anne pressed her hand against the cool glass of the viewing portal. Out there, scattered among a million stars, other civilizations were watching, holding their breath, and asking themselves what these weird, headstrong apes from Earth were going to pull off next. They were wondering if maybe, just maybe, these humans would come and stand up for them too. And deep down, Anne knew the answer would always be yes. If you need a hand, we'll be there. If you're our friend, we'll watch your six. And if you make a habit of picking on the helpless, we will become your problem. That's just who we are. It's who we've been all along. The galaxy was stunned into silence the first time humanity showed up to settle a debt. But now, that silence was slowly being replaced by something entirely new. Maybe it was hope, or maybe it was trust. It was the growing feeling that somewhere in all that vast, lonely darkness, there was a people who would stand up to the bullies, who kept their promises, and who would never, ever leave a friend to face the storm alone. 300 years of painful, cosmic silence were finally over. The era of humanity was here, and the rest of the galaxy was just going to have to get on board. But Anne had a strong hunch it was going to be for the best. Humanity had learned a hard lesson from the Curie's sacrifice. They had worked to become worthy of that incredible gift, and now they would spend the rest of time making sure no one else ever had to face the end by themselves. The debt was officially paid. But the real work, the amazing challenge of building a better, friendlier galaxy, was just getting started. And you better believe humanity was ready for it.